Okay, so just to start this event, so thank you for coming. All the 95 people that we have so far, so it's still growing. Thank you for coming, and this is one of those talks that we are organizing periodically at the Universidad de los Andes with the purpose of having some healthy and intelligent and an interesting debate about several subjects on petroleum engineering and the petroleum industry in Colombia, which is the role that Brigitte and I are involved in mostly. We are the ones who coordinate this master's program in petroleum engineering here at Universidad de los Andes. So there is an academic interest in doing this kind of events. So just without further delay, so let me tell you how is this event going to, what is the mechanics of this? So we're going to have this brief presentation, which I hope is going to take only a few more minutes, and then the main presenter from the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy in Norway is going to talk to us for about 45 minutes, and then we will have approximately maybe another 30 or 45 minutes for questions from you, from the public. So that's basically the format. I may intervene to steer the conversation in a certain direction if in a healthy way. I hope so, in a correct way. And again, the questions, you can please type them on the chat, and then Brigitte will collect them, and then when the time for questions comes, we'll read them to the presenter, and he will answer to us. Again, please type your name when you type the question. Please type your name too. Please keep your microphone off. Although I think the system does that automatically, but if for some reason it doesn't, please keep your microphone off so that environmental noise from your house or your office or wherever you are doesn't interfere with the presentation. And so let me present the. First of all, let me thank the Norwegian embassy in Bogota, in particular Kirsti Andersen, one of the diplomats at the embassy who was very polite, very nice to us, to helping us to get this working. She is the one who contacted the presenter, which I'm about to introduce. So thank you to the Norwegian embassy in Bogota. And so the person that we have to talk to us today is Mr. Dag Erlend Henriksen. Henriksen is his last name. He is the Deputy Director General and Head of the Petroleum Law Section at the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy in Oslo, in Norway. Dag has a law degree from the University of Oslo. He started his career in the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy as a research fellow and advisor in legal and regulatory matters for the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. Then he left as a partner in a private law firm that he was a partner of, in which they dealt with many subjects in litigation and regulation subjects, again in petroleum and energy subjects areas. And he, in particular, Dag was an advisor through his company, through his firm. He advised the governments of several countries, like Ghana in Africa, Angola in Africa again, East Timor of course in the Pacific, in Asia. Basically, the advice that he lent them was mostly on defining and developing petroleum legislation. When these countries found that they had a wealth of oil, what to do with it, which is part of what we want to hear about today. And after 18 years in that private law firm, he came back to the ministry in 2017, and with the role that I just mentioned, he's the Deputy Director General, Head of the Petroleum Law Section at the ministry. So without further delay, let me just introduce you to, let Dag talk and start his presentation. Thank you so much, Dag, and go ahead, please.
Thank you, Rodrigo, and I must say I'm deeply honored to be invited to give this speech to you, although I can't see anyone. I would like to have this opportunity. It's a great pleasure to do this. I've been to Colombia a couple of times, talking to both authorities and other stakeholders, and it's always a pleasure to be able to talk about the Norwegian petroleum industry. Oil and gas industry is a big industry in Norway, and sharing our experiences and views is always interesting, because there are always questions coming up that we never thought about. So I really hope, although I can't see you, I hope that you will be posing questions, and feel free to ask anything that you might think of. And when I'm done with all the slides, I hope that we will have a fruitful discussion. So, with that, thank you, Rodrigo, for the invite. What I'm going to talk about today is the Norwegian oil and gas industry, and how it has developed to what it is today, and what it is today. And then try to, at the end, try to sort of say something about what the basic characteristics are that can be transposed to other countries, and in different countries' context. So this is the agenda and the items that I would address. Just heading straight into the presentation. But before I go into all the items that you see here, I would like to just give you some facts on the oil and gas business in Norway. The fact is that oil and gas deposits are only found on the continental shelf. So all our oil and gas business is offshore. We have no onshore resources. So everything is going on offshore, and the Norwegian coastline is a very long and rugged coastline. It's a very harsh climate throughout the Norwegian continental shelf, and in particular in the northern parts. And as you can see from this slide, the NCS, which we call it, the Norwegian continental shelf, is about 8-9 times bigger than the Norwegian landmass. It's 2.2 million square kilometers, and it is anticipated that half of this area has a geology where you can find petroleum. So far, we have opened up 1/4 of the total area of the NCS for petroleum activities, and I will come back later to what that really means. So this is on the right side. You see a map here of Norway. We are situated west of Sweden and Finland, and north of Denmark and UK. And you see the Barents Sea, the green area in the Barents Sea, which is in the Arctic. And then in the middle, we have the Norwegian Sea and the North Sea in the south of the NCS. So these are the 3 regions that are open for petroleum activities. So more facts about the production from the NCS. This slide shows you the total production volumes from the NCS in million barrels of oil equivalents per day. So you can see the green bars are topping out at around 3 million barrels a day in around 2000. And it has been reduced quite a lot since then. And as you can see, the gas production has been sort of predominantly, or not predominantly, maybe not the right word, but it has been, well, more and more important in the total production. We account for approximately 2% of the global crude volumes in the world. As you can see on the right side of this, we produce, or we export a lot of gas. We are the third largest gas exporter in the world. And the reason for that is obviously that we produce a lot of gas, and also that we do not use any of that gas inland. So we export almost everything. Inland consumption is basically insignificant in total volume. On the left side, you see our ranking as number 15 on the among oil exporting countries. So we produce a little less than Qatar. I'm not sure where Colombia is on this, would be on this ranking, but maybe not so far behind, and hopefully increasing. As I said, gas is becoming increasingly important. Norwegian gas accounts for about 20 to 25% of the gas consumption and the gas demand in the European Union, which makes us a very important player in the energy supply of the Union. Now, gas is being transported to the market mainly by gas pipelines. It's a pipeline system which stretches around 8,000, 9,000 kilometers in total. What you see here is a map of the UK, southern part of Norway, and continental Europe coastline. The orange lines are the existing pipelines going from the Norwegian continental shelf to Europe. So this system is operated by a state-owned company, which is called Gasco. It's an independent system operator, meaning that it doesn't own anything in the system itself. Its only role is to serve as an operator. The pipeline system is owned by a joint venture called Gassled, which is a joint venture of industrial and financial owners. It's 6 owners in total today. Now the state holds around 30% of the shares in the joint venture through a state-owned company participating in oil and gas production and transportation, which is a separate company than Gasco. It's a regulated third-party access system, but its basic feature is open access for all producers of gas. There is an entry tariff to be paid and an exit tariff, and the tariff obviously goes to the joint venture owners owning the pipeline system, and it's a regulated tariff system. The state has an objective of providing and regulating the tariff, giving the owners a 7% pre-tax return. So we have been struggling a bit with this because we had a Supreme Court case last year. We were challenged by the owners, or some of the owners, to this system when we reduced the tariffs because of the fact that 7% return was achieved at a certain point in time on the historic investments. We were sued by some of the financial owners. Luckily, we won the case, so we continue to pursue the objective of 7%. And once that objective has been achieved and obtained in the system for the owners, then the tariff is reduced. Okay, some macroeconomic indicators. As you probably know, the petroleum sector in Norway is the largest industry sector. and it provides a huge part of our GDP. And these figures are from the national budget for 2020, made in November 2019. As we all know, COVID-19 situation and the pandemic would probably disturb this picture a bit. So it depends on the supply side and the demand side for the rest of the year to see how this actually ends up. But at least this is what was predicted when we made the national budget for 2019. We have around 180,000 people directly or indirectly employed in the sector. That is 5% of the total employment. So this is the most important industrial sector in Norway. And you can see on the bottom figure here is just showing since production started until the predictions for 2021. It's the share of GDP, share of investments, share of exports, and share of total state revenues. So it has been just above 50% at peak level. So it's quite a lot. Now, to the history of Norwegian oil and gas, I will not go through all of this, just rest assured, because all of this is, it takes more than a week, I guess, to go through this, and we don't have a week. So I would just go through the main headlights here of this. As you may know, there was a huge discovery made on the Dutch continental shelf in 1958, and that prompted some geologists to believe that there may be oil and gas on the Norwegian continental shelf as well, because we find the same geological structures on the NCS as were found on the Dutch continental shelf. In 1958, there was a geologist from what we call the Norwegian Geology Survey who said that he would personally drink all the oil and gas that could be found on the NCS, because you can completely disregard the possibility that there is oil and gas to be found. Luckily, he was wrong. Luckily for the country and luckily for him, because that would have been a pretty horrendous task. But we have made some, I would say in hindsight, some very clever decisions during this pioneering period stretching from 1958 to 1969. Now, following the discovery of gas on the Dutch continental shelf, the American company Phillips Petroleum applied for exclusive rights over the entire Norwegian continental shelf back in 1962. They offered to pay $160,000 per month for exclusive rights for anything that can be found on the NCS. They only got the reply to that application in the late 1980s. So, and obviously the answer was no. And that was a good thing. So what we did when we received that application back in 1962, it started to occur to someone that this may be the beginning of a new industry in Norway. So the Norwegian government at that time declared sovereign rights over the NCS and prepared legislation to that effect. We embarked upon negotiations with the UK and Denmark to establish the demarcation lines between our countries. And we reached agreement on that in '65, very important, because the demarcation line was then drawn following the median line principle, meaning that some of the very big oil fields and oil and gas fields on the NCS would be under Norwegian control. So luckily for us, those who negotiated these treaties were forward-thinking. So that was in the 60s. Then we had the first licensing round in 65. We had the first discovery made in 67, was non-commercial, but producing today. So it has been found commercial later. The first commercial discovery was made in late 1969. That was the field called Ekofisk, still producing, and it will be producing well into the 2040s. So that's quite a remarkable field, really. Following the 60s, we entered the 70s, and in that period, 1970 to 78, we had a lot of major discoveries made. There were some huge oil fields found and some very big gas fields. We established a lot of the petroleum administration institutions. We established the state-owned company Statoil, which is now Equinor. We established a petroleum directorate in 1972. And already in 1971, the parliament adopted what we called the 10 oil commandments. I'll come back to that because they are forming the basis for today's petroleum policy in Norway. The Ministry of Petroleum and Energy was established in 1978. So that's, that was the institutions. Now in 79 to 85, we had something that we can call the consolidation period. Then the activities moved further north. We had a lot of political discussions about that. We had several major field developments completed, like the Statfjord, the Gullfaks, and the Troll field, which are all among the world's greatest oil fields. We constructed a gas terminal, which you saw on one of the first slides. We changed the role of Statoil. Statoil had, at that time, in the middle of the 80s, become a very large company in national sense. It dwarfed other companies in Norway in terms of size and political influence and magnitude. So at that time, the government in 85 found that Statoil had become too powerful. So we established something that we call the SDFI, the State Direct Financial Interest, by which the participating interest in the licenses held by Statoil at that time was split in two. So the state actually just took from Statoil, which was a 100% owned company. So it's not sort of a nationalization move. It's just a reorganization of the state ownership and engagement in the business. Statoil was left with approximately half of what they had before. So following that, we had two different animals representing the state's interest in the business. We had the SDFI, which was an economic interest only. We had Statoil. In order not to build up a separate oil company alongside with Statoil, we let Statoil just manage the SDFI interests. And they continued to do that until the beginning of the 2000s. But in the period from 1986 to the year 2000, we had, that was sort of the golden age. We had rapidly increasing oil production. We had a lot of focus on recovery rates, in particular in the southern part of the NCS. But we also saw a lot of volatility in oil prices. So in 1990, we established this sovereign wealth fund, the Petroleum Fund. There were no money put into that fund until 1997, I think. I'll come back to that. The EEA agreement, which is an agreement between the European Union and some European countries which are not party to the European Union, that necessitated changes to our legislation. So in 1994, we repealed provisions in the petroleum legislation on local content. So from that time on, there are no preferential rights for Norwegian suppliers. And then we come into what we can call the winds of change period from 2000 to 2015. A lot of changes occurred in the petroleum business. We saw, among others, a substantial drop in the number of wells drilled. Exploration activities fell, and we needed to do something in order to attract interest in the Norwegian continental shelf. So there were a lot of measures put in place in order to increase attractiveness and competition. And it worked. In 2004, I think we have around 14 exploration wells drilled. And in 2005, the year we had the new regime in place, we saw around 40 wells drilled, and that has been sort of steadily increasing until 2010-11. So that was very effective. We saw a lot of new players engaging on the NCS. We also, in this period, we changed the state's involvement again. We privatized Statoil partly. We established the management company for the state's interest, the SDFI, which is a 100% state-owned company called Petroleum. Petroleum is not a company engaging in downstream activities, so it's not selling and marketing the state's petroleum. It is mainly looking after the production activities. So it has a very limited organization of around 60 to 70 people. And Equinor is, until now, left with the task of marketing and selling the state's share of petroleum. And we established also in 2001 the system that I talked about a few minutes ago, or about the gas infrastructure. And the period from 2015 until today, we saw a lot of change, which I think has happened all across Europe and in UK business, oil and gas business, a couple of years ahead of us. We saw the majors leaving. We saw a lot of changing in the ownership to gas infrastructure, volatility increasing in the pricing, and there's a lot of different players entering the NCS. And obviously, there is a lot of focus on climate risk and ESG. And we have the first climate lawsuit as a mark on that. We see the first climate lawsuit to be handled by the Supreme Court this year. Actually starts in 2 weeks from now, where the Norwegian government is challenged by environmental organizations on the award of production licenses in the 23rd concession round. So that will be decided upon by the Supreme Court later this year. The state has won in the 2 previous instances, so we hope to do the same this and final round this time, but we are not sure. So cross our fingers. Okay, the 10 oil commandments from 1971, as I said, they are the starting point and the basis for the petroleum policy we have today. I will not go through all the issues here, but I think you can have the slides probably, so you can see that later. But I think this is an example of how forward-looking the parliament, the government, and the administration was back in 1971. At that time, at the time these 10 oil commandments were adopted by parliament, It was only 18 months since we made our first commercial discovery, and no one knew how this would transform the Norwegian society. And still at that time, we said that national supervision and control is key, must be ensured for all operations. It is a goal to make Norway as independent as possible, and also what we can call the founding fathers of petroleum policy. They foresee that there will be new industry developed on the basis of petroleum. They banned the flaring of gas, and they said that petroleum from the NCS should, as a general rule, be landed in Norway. And all these points on this slide are, I think, very good to bear in mind when we advise other countries on how to develop their own resource base and to make sure that the resources will benefit the society as a whole. Obviously, when doing that, context is a key factor. So local context and local requirements and different social context and political context in each country must be taken into account. That's fairly obvious, but basically we can say that these bullet points can be adopted in some way or the other to many resource-rich countries, adjusted for local context. Okay, so what is our petroleum policy today? It's fairly easy. It is to provide a framework for the profitable production of oil and gas in the long term. That is what we here in the ministry is pursuing. And that has been the policy of the Norwegian government for many, many years. So we have a very stable framework in terms of political consensus on this. There are very little changes to petroleum policy since the beginning of the 70s until today. So the policy goals that we pursue is to ensure high value creation. What we normally say is that the Norwegian government is no different than oil companies in the sense that we are in it for the money. We want to collect a very high value creation from our resources. So we need to ensure that that value creation is collected by Norway as a country. We need to do that efficiently and environment friendly. Our goal is to make sure that value creation is to benefit the Norwegian society as such, as a whole. In order to do that, we need to make sure that we have a government take system, and I will come back to what that implies. Activities should be well regulated within what we can call the sound HSE framework. We need to make sure that we take environmental concern and that we take into account other uses of the sea. As our offshore industry takes place offshore and only there, we also have a very strong fishing industry. It is paramount for us to make sure that the fishing industry and the offshore industry, oil and gas industry, can sort of live side by side, because we live from the same ground. So there are some conflicts from time to time, but they are mostly dealt with in a friendly manner. So there are very few conflicts, real conflicts on this issue. A few words on our petroleum administration. This is what it looks like if you look at the institutions. We have the Parliament. The Parliament has a key role in adopting the petroleum policy, and every now and then, last time in 2018, the government presents a white paper to the Parliament explaining the policy and the policy goals, and that, as I said, that is based on the 10 oil commandments from 71, obviously with some adjustments for the kind of players we have, the market framework, and so on. But basically, it's the same. So it's just it's repeating the overall policy, but it is also adapting to the changes. That happens, as I said, every now and then. 2018, last time before that, 2011, and so on. So that's the role of the parliament. The government is obviously responsible for everything that goes on in the ministries, and the ministry are the so-called secretariat for the government, and preparing whatever needs to be dealt with by government and presented again to the parliament. Now, to the left here, you see Ministry of Oil and Energy. We have a subordinate directorate called the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate. Now, we are, together with the NPD, the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, we are the Resource Management Administration. So resource management is dealt with in the ministry and the NPD. The Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, second to the left, also plays an important role because they are responsible for HSE in the business. And the reason for splitting resource management and HSE management is that you don't want to have the same institution looking after both resource management and HSE, because then you can experience that HSE issues are played down or sort of not weighted high enough if you look at the economics of resource production. So Ministry of Climate and Environment also has an important role because they issue permits for emissions and steers the activities in terms of setting requirements for technology and so on. Other important institutions on this slide would be the Ministry of Finance to the right. We have a special petroleum tax in Norway, and that is administered by the Petroleum Tax Office. So these are the institutions. In Norway, we have what we like to see as clear and explicit distribution of roles between authorities, government side, directorate, and companies. We in the ministry do not perform any economic evaluation of production levels or plan for development and operations. In our view, that is the role of companies. They are taking the market risk and they are putting their money into development, and they are best placed to do evaluation of the value of the resources when it comes to development of the resources. So what we are trying to do is to govern and steer their activities in so that the goal of society in terms of maximum value creation is achieved, but we do not monitor or supervise their financial or economical evaluation of their resources. The directorate is responsible for following up on a daily basis the activities of the companies. So this figure is maybe simplistic, but it is very important for us, in particular in today's political landscape, where you see a lot of ESG activities and a lot of political parties trying to put responsibility on authorities that we do not like to have, basically. We would like the companies to do commercial evaluations, and we would like the authorities to do what we should be doing. All our institutions operate on what we call a sectorized legal basis, and by that I mean we have resource management in the middle here, We have environment authorities, and they are looking after their part of it. HSE, as I said, is dealt with by the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs and the Ministry of Environment. All of these institutions have their own legal basis for performing their tasks, and they issue permits with a basis in their own legal framework, their own acts and regulations. So it's a fragmented system, so to say. It's not a one-stop shop permit that you get in Norway for doing these activities. You will need to collect permits and authorities from different authorities with different legal basis. So how do we grant rights to companies? Well, we have what we call a concession system. We provide oil and gas companies with a license. The license is what we can call a production license. Although it provides the right to do a lot more than production, that is the name that we have given it, basically. So the license is given to a number of companies. We have a system of forced marriage. So the group is normally put together by the ministry, or we can have what we can call a group application where companies apply together. Sometimes we have companies applying for licenses in concession rounds where they say, I would like to have a 40% interest in this area. And then we would put together the rest of the license or adjust the 40% share. But basically, it's a forced marriage. So we can, even if they come with a group application, we would put together the group as we see fit based on the qualifications of each company in the group. The Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Regulation, they are a functional legal framework. So the provisions are not descriptive, meaning that there is a wide room for discretion by the ministry. And that is something that sort of causes eyebrows to rise in certain jurisdictions around the world. But we have a fairly transparent public administration in Norway. We have a lot of contact with companies, and we have a very long tradition of preparing legal instruments in this manner. So this works quite well here. And even companies coming from the US, where they like to spell things out and cover every possibility and opportunity for changes in the future, we are more inclined to do short and sweet regulations and permits. That doesn't mean that the Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Regulation is not comprehensive. It covers all phases of petroleum activities and third-party access, for instance, in detail. It covers decommissioning, exploration activities, liability for pollution damages, HSE, and the management of the state financial interest, and a lot of other issues. So it's a very comprehensive system. It's based on more than 50 years of development, and we believe that it is well understood by the players that we have on the NCS as of today, and that's it sort of functions quite well. Now, when we put together a license group in the forced marriage system, they are forming a joint venture. That is an unincorporated joint venture with a standardized joint venture agreement. So the joint venture agreement is something that we have developed in the ministry, and we stipulate that as a condition when granting a license. And it's also an accounting agreement following as an appendix to the joint venture agreement. So that is applied in all the different licenses on the NCS. They have the same joint venture agreement. Makes it very easy for us, and it makes it also very easy for the licensees, and it promotes a very efficient transaction market. The basic requirement to become a licensee on the NCS is that you have an organization in Norway with HSE competence and sufficient technical competence for the activities that you foresee. You need some financial capacity, although as the players have changed from what we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where we had all the major oil companies here. We now have a lot of different players, so it's fair to say that financial capacity with licensees have been changed over the last 10, 15 years, and it has not increased. We require parent company guarantee from any licensee as well. So there is a pre-qualification system put in place to become a licensee. So that is, I think that's about what we should be saying about the requirements. As I said, the legislation is based on a comprehensive system. It is a comprehensive system. We regulate all the important phases of petroleum activities. And what you see here is a slide showing the different phases from what we control and what we as an authority have the responsibility to do. That's the opening of new areas, where we are responsible for making sure that an impact assessment is carried out. We then open the area, or the decision is made by the parliament based on a recommendation from government, but that's an authority decision. We then invite companies to apply for exploration activities, or they can do it if they would like. So for exploration activities, we have an open door policy. Exploration activities or exploration licenses are granted to seismic companies. They are not exclusive. The red oval circle here is the activity is illustrating the activities covered by the production license. Now, as you can see, the production license then covers exploration, drilling, development of deposits, production of resources, and decommissioning activities. So that's the key tool, the production license. The production license provides you with exclusive rights to perform all of these activities within the area covered by the license. It's normally granted for an initial period of up to 10 years. It's a staged development process where companies, the licensees, are required to go step by step, and that ladder ends up with a requirement to submit a plan for development and operation, or drop the license. Now, if you go through all the different steps and you submit the PDO, the plan for development and operation, you are normally entitled to enter the production phase, or you are entitled to do that if the PDO is approved. The exploration phase is normally granted for 30 years. It could be less if the deposit is not requiring a 30-year period. If it is a huge deposit, it takes more than 30 years to deplete it. We still grant the production period for 30 years, and then we come back to a prolongation for the next period. As I said, the Ekofisk field has been producing since 1971. It was prolonged for the first time in 96, and then we granted an extension of the license until 2028. And now the licensees are considering whether to apply for a new extension until 2048. So that remains to be seen. So we are sort of flexible on how long the license should last, but we would like to have some milestones in order to maybe change the license composition or introduce new conditions. Now, the risk and profit in a license, which is held by a joint venture, as I said, is shared between the licensees in proportion to their participating interests.
Can I stop you for a moment, because people are telling me that the presentation is frozen?
Oh!
Can you please stop it and restart it from PowerPoint to see if they are not...
Stop hearing.
No, they are not seeing the slides. The slides don't move forward. They don't. So you change the slide, but it doesn't. So let me ask the people if it's okay now.
I will then move it. Okay, I move it now.
Yes. So is it okay now for Mr. Alex Gonzalez, who was saying that? Is it okay now? Okay, it's okay. Yes, please continue. Thank you.
Maybe it could have been my fault, you know. Maybe I was just too eager on this slide, because I really didn't move it for quite some time. So it could be me.
That's fine.
It could be. Okay, anyway, licensee becomes the owner of its proportionate share of produced petroleum. So if this state-owned company, Petroleum, holds 30% in a license, it becomes the owner of 30%. Now, if Equinor holds 10%, they will become owner of 10%. And that goes for any other company. Yeah. Is that okay? You see the change? I now moved it to production license, second slide.
Yes, that's what we were saying. Thank you so much.
Very good. So the main terms of the production license, I think I covered some of this. It's a work program in the initial phase. And the work program typically consists of certain time limits within which you need to do a certain activity or drop the license. So for the first phase, you are typically required to do seismic surveys, and the next phase, drilling of exploration wells. And the last phase is normally submittance of the plan for development and operation. And if you don't perform the activity within the time limit, you need to drop the license. So this is what we call drill and drop, or drill or drop terms. There are also specific requirements in each license to protect the environment in vulnerable areas and the fishing interest. So for any license in any given area, there are a certain set of HSE and HSE conditions and conditions taking into account fishing interest in that area. So they are specifically tailor-made for each area. And as I've said, you are required to enter into a standardized agreement. And what I don't think I have said earlier is that the operator of the joint venture is appointed by the authorities. The operator of any production license is a licensee himself. So apart from the gas-led system and the joint venture holding the gas infrastructure system, where the operator is an independent system operator, we always have the operator as one of the licensees. Now, following from the fact that the agreements are standardized and set as a condition by the authorities, the voting rules are also set by the authorities. And it's normally a combination of heads and participating interests. So in a typical license where you have 4 licensees, we would say that a majority is made by 2 of the companies holding more than 50%. So there has been a development in the voting rules over the last, 5-6 years, where we have a tendency to go to put more weight on the participating interest and diminish the weight of the number of heads, so that we can see that to be more in line with the trend that we see in commercial joint ventures. Okay, so to a brief outline of the petroleum tax system. these are the different items of what we can call total government take. Total government take consists of all the different tax and fees, dividend from Equinor, which is 67% held by the Norwegian state, and the net cash flow from the state's own participating interest, the SDFI, which stands for the state's direct financial interest, which are managed by Petroleum. It's a net profit tax system. We do not have any production sharing contracts, or we do not have a bidding contest for licenses. So the only income the state receives from the business is coming from these items here: corporate tax, SPT, special petroleum tax, different fees, dividend, and net cash flow. But still it amounts to a lot of money, which we can see later. The net profit tax system in Norway is quite special in the sense that we tax companies on the basis of what we can call a norm price. The norm price is set by something that we call the Petroleum Price Board. The Petroleum Price Board is setting the norm price for a given period up to 1 month, and the gross income of companies are then calculated on the basis of that norm price set by the norm price board. There is no norm price for gas, because the gas market is quite different from the oil market. But we have the possibility to have a norm price for gas as well, but we haven't used it. The norm price system is challenging in terms of the volatility. In times where the volatility is very high and the price fluctuates rapidly, like we have had this year, the norm price system is challenged. But the norm price system was established in 1975 in order to make sure that the state's basis for tax base was not eroded by intra-company or intra-group sales. So in order to keep the tax base based on arm's length sales, we introduced a norm price system rather than checking each and every transaction to make sure it was on arm's length basis. So I will not go into details on the tax system, but saying that the corporate tax level is 22%. That's applied for all corporate tax in Norway. So that's the normal tax rate for any company. We have the special petroleum tax applied for petroleum activities. That would be pipeline activities and oil and gas production. That's to capture the economic ground rent. So that's 56%. We have a very special system of depreciation, 6-year straight line, which is very different from what we have on the land-based system. The tax system applied for companies engaged in normal industrial activities. We have an uplift where oil companies get to deduct 5% of investments cost, up to 5.2% of investments. That would amount to 20.8% over the 4 years it is applied. And that's to keep the neutrality of the system. Oil companies can carry forward losses and uplift with interest, that is as opposed to other companies. We have what we call it says here, the exploration. It should obviously be exploration cost refund scheme, which is one of the very attractive measures we introduced in 2005, where oil companies who are not in a tax position, they are not in a tax paying position, so they do not have a profit that can be taxed. They can actually get their exploration cost refunded by the state so they get a cash refund by the state the year after they incurred the cost. That's a very, very attractive scheme. And what it does is that it neutralizes tax treatment of exploration costs between companies that are not in a tax-paying position and those who are in a tax-paying position. Because companies that are in a tax-paying position and have a profit that is subject to special petroleum tax, so they are making a positive profit, they can deduct the cost in the year that they incur it. The companies that are not in a tax-paying position would, if it did not have the exploration cost refund scheme, they would have to activate the cost and hope to be able to deduct it later when they came into tax-paying position. So it's a very interesting scheme. And I think one of the reasons that we have had a lot of companies coming to Norway and drills a lot of exploration wells since 2005 is the exploration cost refund scheme. We also have a CO2 tax, NOx tax, and area fee payable by the licensees, and we'll not go into the details of that. So with that, we can see on this slide how we calculate all the different items. Operating income calculated on the basis of norm price, deducted operating expenses, depreciation, exploration expenses, and so on. You get to corporation tax base, and you pay 22% of that. You deduct the uplift. In any given year, it's 5.2%, but only for the first 4 years. And then you get to the special tax base. And from that, you pay 56%. So in total, you pay 78% tax. And that's a very high tax burden, obviously. But then we must remember that it also means that the companies will only have to, as they can deduct 78% of their cost, or they deduct 100%, but the tax effect of that is that they only pay 22% of any expense. So that's also a tax system that renders the state with a lot of risk. And that has been challenged over the last years due to climate risk concern and so on. So on the right side, you can see the expected net government cash flow from petroleum activities. 2019 is the actual figures. 2020 figures are expected figures. These are Norwegian kroner, and if you divide it by 10, you get to the dollar amount. So for 2020, the net government cash flow was estimated at, well, close to $25 billion US dollars. And with the effect of the COVID-19 situation, I am pretty sure that the number will be smaller. So moving to the question of how has the Norwegian model influenced other countries in the creation of an oil and gas industry? Well, as Rodrigo said at the beginning, we have, from the Norwegian government side, we have been assisting governments in resource-rich countries around the world in developing what we like to see as a sound framework for oil and gas activities. And we have done that through what we call the Oil for Development program. That was established in 2005 by the Norwegian government, and its objective is to provide assistance to developing countries with resources in their effort to manage their petroleum resources in what we call a sustainable manner. So we have certain criteria that we apply. And this functions in a way so that the different countries approach Norwegian government and ask us to become an OFD, Oil for Development cooperating country. We then evaluate the application or the request. We have a lot of contact in that phase with the government of the country in question, and then we either say you are not a developing country, or you do not have the reception facility, the administration in place that can receive assistance in a proper manner, or legislation or institutions are not in place. So some countries are unfortunately turned down, and some countries are included in the program. In 2020, we had cooperation with 15 countries around the world, and you can see them listed there. The program that we have in Colombia came about as a result of a request from the Colombian government, and I think that was following Norwegian officials' efforts in the peace process in Colombia, and the fact that there were some contacts made between Colombian officials, Norwegian officials, and someone in that sense just promoted the Oil for Development program. So a delegation from Norway went to Colombia in 2016, came back in 2017. There was unfortunately, a fairly lengthy process, but we finally decided that Colombia was taken aboard as a cooperating country within the program. But since you are in a slightly different place than some of the other countries on this list, as you can imagine, it's not a full Oil for Development program that we provide in Colombia and that we have with your government. Colombia is obviously, in most senses of the word, not a developing country. When you compare it to South Sudan and Somalia, they are on a very different place than you are. And when I went to Bogota in 2018 to talk to your administration, I was quite impressed of the sophisticated level of regulation that was actually in place. Although any country have obviously shortcomings, and we do have those also in Norway, I think that it is fair to say, without insulting the other countries, that you are very differently situated than the other countries on this list. So there is a program, but it is fairly limited. Okay, the yearly budget for the Oil for Development is about 200 million Norwegian kroner. That would be around $20 million. What do we do then in the Oil for Development program? How do we assist other countries? There are different institutions involved in the program, and here I have only listed the MPE, which is the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, and the NPD, and though these two institutions are relevant in terms of resource management legal framework. And when we talk about resource management legal framework, we talk about petroleum legislation such as a Petroleum Act or Hydrocarbons Act or whatever you call it, HSE regulations pertaining to oil and gas business, data management, fiscal metering for taxation purposes or different metering purposes, and so on. But we also have other institutions involved in the program, like Ministry of Finance for management of revenues from the oil and gas business. We have environment authorities involved in the program. So we have a lot of different institutions from Norway cooperated with similar institutions in the cooperating countries. But if you take an example such as Angola, we have for many years provided assistance to Angola in developing their Petroleum Act. And following the successful adopting of the act in Angola. We also helped them developing their petroleum regulations. We did the same in Ghana, where they have a Petroleum Act from 2015. We've been in Ghana since 2007 or 8, so it took quite some time. But today they have a Petroleum Act, they have petroleum regulations, they have HSE regulations, they have data management regulations, and they have fiscal metering regulations. One of the factors that makes this process take some time is the fact that we need to adapt to the local context, because assisting other countries through oil for development doesn't mean that we come with a model that we advise other countries to adopt. It is more our approach is more directed against capacity building and securing that local context is taken into account, and that any legal instrument is adopted to fit into the local context, so that ideally local governments, local authorities should develop their own legal framework and their own revenue management and their own level of transparency that is fit for the country in question. So we can only assist to a certain extent, but then the local government will have to take over and take the final step, so to say, and actually do the hard work of writing the legislation and making sure that there are officials trained and there are institutions in place with the right competence and the right legal basis. So, and then this is a very interesting question, and this is something that, well, when I discussed the subject of this talk with Rodrigo prior to this was an issue that came up that should be covered. I think this is a very, very tough question to answer. It's almost impossible. I mean, how could you benefit? And if you go back here, how could we learn from Norway? I mean, we would be Colombia. And I think that context, local context, is a key word to that sense. I mean, if you don't have politicians that are interested in having a transparent regime, transparent system for administering resource management, revenue management, you will not be able to make the rocket sort of lift off the ground. You need to have a petroleum policy in place that is sort of recognized in society. You need to have an organization of the sector where there are institutions that are capable, and they should be competent, and they should be approachable in the sense that industry need to be able to interact with public administration and vice versa. And in some countries that we assist, we see that there is absolutely no confidence between authorities and industries. And in such countries, it is very, very hard to learn anything from our model, because if you go back to where Norway was as a society in the late 50s and in the 60s, we were a poor country in the outskirts of Europe. We had a fairly low standard of living, but we had what we like to see, at least. We had a competent public administration. We were a transparent society. We had We had some industries that we can build on to convert their competencies from building fishing boats, shipyards, to building platforms and so on. So there were a lot of factors in society that made us well suited to make that transformation to benefit from our resources. Not only the fact that we had resources, but there are other factors surrounding that. We also see in some countries that if you develop petroleum legislation from nothing, it will take a long time for civil society and for stakeholders in the business to really get the legislation and the framework, a part of their business attitude, or really get it under the skin, so to say. So it is a stepwise approach that has to be taken. It takes time to develop a legislation and a legal framework that would allow you to have an organization of the sector and an industry sector that is sort of pursuing the same goals as government. But where you want to end up is that you would like to have a resource management system that attracts companies with the relevant technical expertise, sufficient financial capacity, and so on. That's basic. I mean, anyone can say that. And the difficult issue is how to get there. But if you don't have anything, if you don't have confidence, or if you don't have anything that you can build confidence on, you will never get there. And the way to build confidence is to have a framework in place that is accessible, transparent, available, and you need to have competent public administration. You need to have an approach where you cooperate with industry, and you need to have a certain knowledge in the civil society of what you are trying to achieve, and the civil society need to see that government actually pursue that goal. As I said, tough question. The answer is even tougher. Now, concluding remarks. I think we are lucky in Norway. We have predictable and stable conditions, not only for the oil and gas business, but in society in general. And I know that times have been quite tough in Colombia for many, many years, but at least, and I'm on very thin ground here, but if you look at it from Europe, it seems that there are some cornerstones laid down that we can, we cross our fingers at least to hope that in the future you will be able to have more predictable and more stable conditions, and that will allow you to prosper from your resources. So with that said, I think these are my concluding remarks.